you, I'm on the next. So baby, move her legs, I came up for the fucking checks. Don't want no problems, I'm just checking that they know what I said. What you heard about me, tell me, cause I love to know.
The reader of the book makes a really big difference.
Definitely.
I haven't actually done a fiction book, so for me, this is another habit that I've created because, so I'm trained on an academic, master's in religion and culture, a PhD in psychology, but then I started a business and felt like I was missing some of that core business foundational education. So I have two things were great. I had a business coach for a while who sort of prompted me and led me in the right direction, but also recommended a whole bunch of books. And so I've been working my way through those books and then also on some other things. So I primarily do the Audible for nonfiction. I'm not going to go so far as self-help, but they tend to be sort of business, economic oriented kinds of themes.
When you say that, you studied religion and culture and other things, but kind of started a business, what things do you see that if you had studied business, you would have benefited way more?
I don't regret not studying business.
Right.
Because my business is a social enterprise, and I've had a journey. I got to that place in a way that makes sense for me, but seems maybe disjointed by other people. So I went from, my research was around children and the role of community and government social policy in shaping the outcomes of children. And then from there, very uniquely, I went right from doing that research to working in government, doing children's policy. And I say that's rare because it's very unique to sort of go right into your career in your specific field of study.
Right.
So when I was there, we were doing work on children's services, and an opportunity came up where there was an openness to changing children's services, and so I became involved in innovation at the government level, and so started studying a lot about social innovation approaches, which then led me back to Laurier when they started their social innovation and social entrepreneurship option, which is based out of global studies. And so I started to study the more classical design thinking, social entrepreneurship, economic models, things like that. And then sort of decided that I needed to walk the walk. Like I was helping other students develop social enterprises and doing research in that field. But just in my travels came to a place and came to a problem where I decided that I wanted to see if I could make a contribution. So yeah, my husband and I sold our house, we sold all of our stuff, and we moved to another country and started a business.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really cool. That journey for me sort of builds on, in government, I learned a lot of professional skills. I learned about management and leadership and decision making. But then innovation sort of prompts you to, like we talked about earlier, to question assumptions, to experiment and iterate very quickly, try things and learn very quickly, which helps you in a business sense. So yeah, because I enjoy constant learning and I do online courses all the time, just because I feel like there are gaps in my formal education that I try and fill. Like I did the economics 101 course from Stanford, which is on Coursera. You can audit all these courses for free. So I feel like I haven't missed a traditional business education because of the breadth of my path, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So would you say in a way you might have, because of your path, would you say you benefited a little bit more from starting that a little later as opposed to sooner?
Oh, for sure.
Do you think it would have still been as well done if it was sooner?
I think there was So one of the core things with my maturity, my optometrist says my advancing age, which I use a lot. Which I like a lot. I think I've become I'm trying to find the right word. It's not calmer. It's not a slower decision making. I think, so the way that my business coach talked about it is being able to take a greater perspective. So she talks about, imagine that you're up on the balcony instead of on the dance floor, and you're able to look down. So in your youth, when someone steps on your foot, you might be angry and punch them in the face or yell a swear word or something like that on the dance floor. But on the balcony, you can see that someone in front of them tripped, which caused them to step back to get out of that person's way, which made them step on your foot, right? So I think that experience and maturity brought me to a place where I'm better able to step back and take a wider perspective. So when you're trying to start a social enterprise, I mean, we can go into some of the theoretical stuff, but there's you have to take almost a systems approach. Who are the players in this field? Why hasn't anyone solved this problem before? What are the economic limitations of trying to do this in this place? There are so many things that you have to try and put together that I think having all that experience of working in other places, trying to understand and influence systems in other places, once I got to this place where now it was my money on the line, and the stakes were a little bit higher, that I was in a better position to do that work. Yeah.
I think
Final answer.
Yeah. I think it makes sense because as you just evolve through life and mature and see things, I think the more mistakes you make throughout life and sort of the more paths you come across and different people you come across, you 100% I think logically will perform better at most of the things that you're doing, simply because you've seen different things. And I think I kind of relate it to, I guess, immigrants kind of coming here. They've seen different things, and I think that they have a whole other type of mindset and work ethic. So once you're able to have that wider perspective and see more than just sort of what's going on in front of you, I think that definitely, actually that's kind of cool. Now I think if you see a lot of things going on not just in front of you, maybe it'll help solve the problem in front of you.
Yeah, and I think you can also, your ego can get out of it a little bit. If someone else has a great idea, then I'm fully supportive of nurturing that idea as well, instead of feeling maybe your immediate reaction would be defensive and thinking that now you have to compete with this other person,
right?
Versus a more mature approach of saying, this is a big problem. The more people that want to try and contribute to the solution in this space, the better. And so approaching them with a real openness about how can we collaborate effectively to try and, pool our efforts.
Right.
So for me, those are all sort of with a bit of experience and a bit more maturity. I think I'm a better partner as well.
If you mean that kind of being competitive when it comes to social issues and other things, social whatever, rather than being mature, do you think that maturity comes with being not as competitive? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're very competitive, are you immature?
Oh no, I'm super competitive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So am I, because I was gonna say I don't think I'm immature. Good.
About fastest to bicycle to the corner. I mean, I'm not above a quick race or Scrabble or what do you want to swim? How far do you want to go? Yeah, no, I'm super competitive.
Do you think that's helped you?
I think it has. You have to balance that. It's so tricky because what winning means, I think, evolves.
Ooh, okay.
As well. So we can take an equity lens and say we're not all starting from the same spot. So is the finish line in the same place? We can get very sophisticated and talk about things like that if you want, but
I think that's actually a very good point. Because I think depending on what goals you want to reach, then that certainly is your winning.
Yeah, and I think it's, finding what's important to you, your values, your skills, your passions. You have to, that's the magic, right? When you can make a living doing something that's interesting and challenging for you, but also that is serving the social good.
Right.
In my perspective, that's the magic.
Do you think that if we had more of that magic, we might be a little bit better off as, like, I don't know, society or humanity?
I think so.
Yeah.
But that's making value judgments about other people's choices, I think, and I don't necessarily want to go there.
Huh.
That some people, we're going to go in dangerous territory. Some people are making decisions that are more about themselves or their family.
Right.
So that's not necessarily in the spirit of the wider social good.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think most people are kind of just trying to fend for themselves and their family.
Yeah, and I don't, I make all those same choices sometimes.
Of course.
But I think it's trying to do your best to take a bigger perspective as often as you can.
Super random. When you went to I guess it's not super random, but I guess it's just off topic. But when you went to the British Virgin Islands, was there just so much plastic that you were like, wow, this is actually unbelievable?
Yes. So I think we talked about this last week when we were chatting, that my dad wanted to sail in the British Virgin Islands. And so this was his big bucket list dream. And so we made it happen. And that was 2012. And it's a beautiful place and it is lovely. But they had no recycling at all. And it's typical, I've learned since then. It's because I didn't know anything about plastics really. I didn't know anything about recycling at that time. But my understanding is that it's quite typical of smaller and isolated countries that there's no recycling. So we were there as tourists. We put our pop can, our wine bottle, our plastic milk jug, everything goes in the garbage bag. And some islands that are more sophisticated, they actually have, some islands they're digging it, they're burying it into the ground and they're just making mountains. They may have an incinerator, but not very many of them work properly, unfortunately. And in some countries, they actually just burn all the garbage in a big open pit on the side. So runoff goes down into the ocean, and there's a lot of chemicals released in the air. It's bad. So when we were there on our first trip, we went walking to one of the north sides of an island of a very wealthy person who lives down there, and the entire beach was covered in bottle caps. And it was horrible. I guess you don't really think about it. And they're bottle caps that, there's nothing, when you look out, there's nothing out there but ocean for an 8-hour flight. So those things were coming from somewhere else, right? And it's sort of, when you drop something in the ditch on the ground, and cigarette butts are actually one of the worst things that you can put on the ground, but incidentally, chewing gum. But when you put something on the ground, it goes somewhere. And you have to just kind of wrap your head around that everything that we make, when we put it on the ground and don't dispose of it or process it properly, it's still there and it just goes somewhere else and becomes someone else's problem. So, as I said, I was sort of working in social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and my husband and I were also at the time sort of thinking about moving somewhere warm because it had been 2 brutally cold winters. We were like, why don't we, again, the questioning the assumptions, why do we have to live here? Why don't we go and try living somewhere else? So we had sort of been, I use the word auditioning,
right.
Warmer climates, going for, good long vacations. So I just said, could we move here and try and do something to address the plastic waste.
Right.
And that was literally how it started. It's just a question. can we move to the British Virgin Islands and I will start a company that recycles plastic.
And he was just all for it.
I think it was late in the evening when I asked.
So you're smart. You know when to ask your questions.
But yeah, no, the timing just seemed to work out. I mean, we were ready to try something different. We were in a good place financially. Again, a lot of privilege associated with being able to go and do that. Like,
right.
Financially, we were in a place. He was able to get a job there. Like, just a lot of things had to work out. You have to make a really bold choice to do something like
Definitely.
that, I would say. But also things have to work out. I didn't go into it lightly, so I just wanted, like, I didn't just jump off a cliff. So once we were like, okay, yes, let's explore what that could look like.
Right.
That I traveled there by myself, and met with some of the big industry people, like CEOs and managers of some of the really big companies there. I went and talked to people who own resorts, potential customers. Would you buy something that was made of plastic? Like, I sort of did a little market validation. So we decided that we would build furniture, that was where you could generate enough revenue to sustain a business that processed the material. So then, I took a trip down there and did sort of some market validation kind of stuff. I started writing grant proposals. I started working on business plans. Like, we didn't just do it.
Right.
My planning brain kind of took over, and it was probably 14 months after we first, maybe a year and a half after we first had the idea, that we actually, because it takes time to sell your house and quit your job and do all of those things.
Do you think that seeing the opportunity there is a huge part of it? Like, maybe you had that opportunity, you had all the resources and the time, and it was a great coincidence, but if you just couldn't open your eyes to notice it, do you think you probably wouldn't have been there, do you think? Like,
yeah, I think that there's two things. So there's lots of people who notice problems in and around their life, who just accept that that's the way that it is.
Interesting.
So you have to see it. So there's people who don't see problems. There are people that see them but don't think that they could change them. I think that's part of it. And then, but there, I think that sense of self-efficacy is probably a part of it. That to, like, really, who am I to think that I could go to this other country and try and deal with the plastic waste? But there's also there are sort of two things that I sort of live by. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And why not you? So if you sort of go by those two statements, kind of strips away some of the barriers, I guess, some of the mental barriers you might have.
Where do you think that comes from? Like, how do you just think that? I mean, I think that too sometimes, because at the end of the day, I think it's important to kind of control that ego and humble yourself and sort of remind yourself, like, who are you? Who are you really to do this? But to also have that, just those guts to be able to say, like, no, why not me? Look at me, I've done all this. Why wouldn't it be me? Like, where does that come from?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So, there's a philosophical kind of approach. Roger Martin, who was with the University of Toronto and the Rotman School, he has a quote, I'm going to mess it up, but it's essentially that everything in the world was created by somebody. So all decisions were made by somebody. Yeah. Everything is the way that it is because somebody decided it. And so why don't you decide things? Like, why not you? Why don't you decide some things too? So that's part of it. But I think also you can build a sense of self-efficacy by having small wins. Like, you can build momentum toward bigger goals. Right. I think that's something that we've discussed in the past as well. That if you start, so I said that people see things that they don't like or that might not be working very well, but they just accept the status quo and they don't ever do anything about it. Like, I don't like my kitchen, but I live with it like that for 20 years, even though there's no place for the toaster. Like, those kinds of things where people just don't try and solve. But I think if you if you have small wins, like if you try and solve this little problem that makes your life better, and then you try and contribute in this little thing that in your neighborhood that helps the kids at the park, or
Right.
like, I think you can build momentum to have that sense of confidence for yourself.
Yeah.
That's important.
100%. And I think it's also about, I guess, even valuing those wins as well, because I think a lot of people sort of want to just do a bunch of great things and have these big goals, and it's very easy, in my opinion, to be able to say like, nah, that's not enough of a goal. Do you know what I mean? To be able to say like, sure, I help these kids in a playground, but I want to help all these kids in every playground all over the world. So one isn't enough for me. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people I shouldn't say a lot of people, but I don't know, at least I can relate to that.
Yeah, for sure. There are people that say, your big goals, and you don't have to tell people this, they can be the goals that you hold for yourself. But if your big goals don't scare you at least a little bit, then they're not big enough. Like, then you're not aiming high enough.
Huh. That's funny you say that, because just the goals and stuff that I have are very terrifying, but they're so exciting. It's kind of like a roller coaster. Like, you're just going up and you're buckled in. You have no idea what's going on, and you're just hoping it works.
Let's do this.
But but you have like these butterflies and this excitement, and it's weird. Like, it's so fun. Mm-hmm. And now that I think about it, I've never been a fan of like scary movies and like horror movies, but maybe now I kind of get why people like them, because you definitely have a little bit of fun and adrenaline. Yeah. When you have fear.
I've done hard things for my business.
Like what?
So hard for me, because I bought a piece of equipment in the plastics world. It's called an extruder. And little did I know that when I purchased the machine from a company in the United States it's used, that when they shipped it to me, it would be in 3 parts.
Oh.
So the machine itself, and then the control box where you had all the buttons, and then the control panel that had the circuit board and all of those pieces. And they had just, because they shipped them separately, just sort of bundled together, someone had just gone and cut all the wires that connected the different things together. And so this is how it works. I didn't know that, I'm new, but anyways, so the thing about doing a social enterprise and trying to do it on your own is, at the beginning, we're still very much in the startup phase. You don't have a lot of money. And so I both didn't particularly have the money to pay someone to come and put this back together for me, but also we're in a small island and people hadn't seen a machine like that. And even the electricians that I consulted were like, I don't know. I don't know anything. So I took some courses online about electrical circuitry, and I actually called the company that I tracked down who had the circuit board in it, and I called the hotline number.
Wow.
And asked them a bunch of questions. And then I bought the supplies. So I remember I had this moment. I was like, okay, like I've done the research, I've got the supplies, I've mapped everything out. And I actually, I had like a verbal affirmation. I'm like, I can do this. I can go slowly and methodically, and I can do this. And lo and behold, the machine runs. It's been going perfectly for a year and a half. And yeah, now I know a lot more about electrical circuitry than I ever thought that I would before.
Wow.
So it's not impressive for someone who studied electrical engineering, or like that's not impressive at all. But for me, being a PhD student who specializes in research and statistics and methods and things, like that was hard and scary, and I felt a sense of accomplishment in completing that and doing, and it makes me believe that I can do other hard things.
That's actually crazy you say that, because I've kind of definitely felt that recently, where you just say I'm going to do something, and at the end when you do it, even if you don't finish it, I feel like coming 90% of the way or even 80% of the way, I think is a huge win, especially
or learning a lot. Like that's the other thing about the sort of the being on a path, or I sort of say that now that I would specialize in innovation, that to try and for it not to work out, but for you to learn a lot and have the confidence to try again is also a win. That's also winning.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think even if you don't try again, I think as long as you can acknowledge that you have learned something and what you've learned as well, I think that in itself is a win. Yeah, even if you kind of just put that book away and then whatever, that's another chapter of your life that you don't even care about. I think as long as you can kind of be self-aware enough to understand what you've learned and the fact that you've learned, I don't think it's ever a loss. I don't think you ever really not won. But I think that's another crazy thing too, is I think you just kind of need this weird shift in mentality where you can literally look at nothing like a loss. Everything is literally a lesson. Mm. And I think that's such a, I guess it's optimistic, but I don't know if it's also good to always be optimistic. So I think maybe it's a little realistic in a way where it's like, yeah, sure, I might have not won, but I certainly haven't lost. Mm-hmm. I think.
I agree.
And it's weird, whenever I kind of play around with those types of thoughts and just sort of like think to myself and say things like that, I, one, usually kind of stumble upon something new and sort of come up with a new thought, but two, also realize that I think, I don't know, like I don't think I've really heard a lot of people talking about it. Like I think a lot of people can sort of just say that they understand, hey, yeah, there are no L's, everything's a lesson. But I really don't think, I shouldn't say anyone, but not a lot of people actually wholeheartedly practice that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable to, do hard things that are where you're not going to succeed. I mean,
right.
The success rate on doing hard things is probably like 50%, right? Tops.
Yes.
So you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to go out and try things that are new or that you don't have expertise, and accept that it might not work and that the best you're going to get out of this is a lesson learned. Like, yeah, I think that maybe that's not a comfortable, safe place for a lot of people to be.
I mean, it makes sense, but now that you said the word vulnerability, I think like a lot of words, there's just specific connotations towards it, and you just assume that being vulnerable is maybe like a bad thing, or it's like a immature thing. And it's like, oh, why are you so scared? Why are you vulnerable? But it's like, I think being vulnerable has nothing to do with being scared or weak. I think it's just being open and.
Yeah, I'm willing to express that. So I'm a quite intensely private person.
Right.
So I don't usually talk about these things at all. So I'm quite comfortable being expressing vulnerability to myself.
Right.
And maybe to my very close circle. But I'm someone who does new things largely in private. So when I said that I was wiring up this big, huge $10,000 piece of equipment that I had purchased in a sector that I 3 years ago knew relatively little about, I did that work on my own. So there's sort of a balance there between
right.
I'm quite happy to toil away and figure things out and learn, but because I'm so private, I guess I do that behind closed doors. So I'm not yet comfortable to be out in the world shouting to people that I'm doing these new things.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No.
I don't think I'm all the way there. I think a really fully mature, self-aware person can do that.
Right.
And can be vulnerable in the best sense out in public. And
right.
I'm not sure that I'm there yet.
Interesting.
I'm working on it.
Huh. I guess honestly, I don't necessarily like blame you. It may kind of make sense.
But I've seen your stuff, so we talked about this before. I celebrate your confidence and the videos that you were doing, that to film and to go out and approach people and be yourself. I think that is demonstrating a kind of vulnerability. I mean, people can tell you to F off, and so yeah, I think that you do that in a really wonderful way.
Thanks. I mean, I just think that you can be vulnerable, and I think you can also be confident at the same time. Because like going up to people and sort of just asking questions on the street, you are in that situation the vulnerable one, because you made the initiation, you have the question just up in the air. And if this person doesn't want to answer it and just walk away, then, or just say F you, then yeah, you're the one who's belittled, I guess, in a way, or made beta. But I think that you can turn any situation into that, like, not necessarily belittlement or a beta moment, but more so an alpha moment by, it just depends on how you express that vulnerability, in my opinion. Because I just think that being vulnerable, I think, is important. It's kind of like the way I see being sad. I think like a lot of men have a hard time crying, and I think, and expressing their sadness. But I think it just doesn't really make sense to me, because one, I think once you express that sadness and you cry, not only are you usually more, like, way more relieved and just a lot more calm, but at the same time, it's just an emotion at the end of the day. Like, if we can sit here and laugh and have fun, why can we not be sad? Like, why can't I come cry to you? You know what I mean? Obviously, depending on who it is, but kind of like vulnerability, I think it's very similar. And I think it kind of just depends on how you approach it, I guess.
Yeah, it allows someone else to come in too. If you're sad, if you don't tell anybody, then no one can share that with you or try and support you.
Right.
So
when you say you had a business coach, did you find that kind of like support, maybe not like emotionally, but professionally at least, like, did that really pay off?
Mm-hmm. It was great, and it really helped with my confidence around claiming. We talked about identity earlier too, about claiming the identity of a business owner before I would say, oh, I'm trying to do this work around plastics. Like, I would kind of skirt the edges about what was happening. So in the British Virgin Islands, we are very lucky that Richard Branson makes one of his homes there, and he is a generous man and has a social. He has a charity called UNTI, but also supports entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs in the environmental sector specifically. So you can get an interest-free 3-year loan from his foundation in order to start a business that's related to sustainability. So we have benefited from that generosity, but it was also through Unite BVI that they, I guess they supported me. They paid for a business coach for me for a 6-month period of time from a wonderful woman actually based in Australia who specializes in female entrepreneurs. So I think it's interesting that a lot of the things that a lot of the exercises and things that we did together are things that I already knew from the innovation work that I was doing and stuff that I had, taught in workshops to other people. So in one case, it was I sort of suspended sort of that analysis of what was happening. Like, so she was having me do an exercise, and in my mind, I'm going, the reason that you're asking me to do this is because you want to bring me to, like, I sort of had to stop that part and just be present in the activity and just follow the instructions and not ask questions about, or not make suggestions about what she could do differently. So it wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily her method. I'm not sure that I didn't learn a terrible amount of new content, if that makes sense. But the opportunity to have, bi-weekly discussions about my business, to that part was really helpful. But as much as anything, to have a business coach meant, and that I owned a business and that I had a business coach really strengthened that part of my identity, and taking that on as a more foundational part of my identity made me a better business owner, if that makes sense. Like before I was an academic and a researcher who was trying to do this business, and now I own a business, and that the perspective changes. It's not just a thing I'm doing on the side.
Right,
It's
right.
more foundational. So I make my decisions differently, I allocate my time differently, and so that work with her was sort of important to that shift, I would say.
Interesting, because when you say that, I would have never really assumed that having that identity to be able to say I'm a business owner unconsciously actually makes a big difference. But now I guess it kind of makes sense, because it's like with this or with like other stuff that we want to do and have things going on, whether it's the charity or other projects with video, I don't like, kind of like what you were saying, I don't necessarily say I run a charity or I do this. I'm just like, hey, I'm a student and I have some projects and I'm just living life right now. But and now that I think about it, I kind of understand like how that decision making and how that mental shift would occur if you were to start going around saying like, no, this is like, I'm a founder, I do this and this, and really like giving yourself that title, I think is cool, because now that I think about it, it's kind of like, you know, you got to make your bed in the morning, right? If your room's not clean, I don't know, maybe that says something about your brain. So I think not necessarily like undervaluing, but not putting yourself to that title or like that podium, I think takes like an unconscious hit. I don't know. And I guess like now that I think about it, it kind of makes sense, because that's someone with like not necessarily like a big ego, but just someone that I guess has a lot of belief in himself. It's just funny now that I think about it, because it's like, how much belief would I have in myself if all this time I called myself by something else other than just a student? You know what I mean? That's crazy. The other thing though I'm very curious about is, you know, being that I studied political science, what kind of stuff did you do in the Middle East?
It was just they're supporting teachers, actually. So how did that happen? There are 2 universities in Afghanistan, and they were working with the City University of New York around, I think that's the name of it, right? Around professional development and some of the on-campus services and things that they were going to provide for students. It's interesting that the training was supposed to happen, I think in the US, but the government wouldn't let this group of 30 faculty members from Afghanistan come into the US. I think there was something like that. So they were hunting around trying to find a country where they could host this professional development, and it ended up being in India. So the faculty members who were taking part of the professional development went to India, and all of the workshop facilitators came from US or Canada over to India as well. So I was working with them for 2 days. My part was about, they asked for an overview on learning disabilities, which was something, you know, that I had as part of my education study. My doctoral degree is in developmental psychology, and so studied a lot of components related to education and learning. So I had 2 days with them, and we did 1 day on sort of an overview of learning disabilities, and then the next day focused on an innovation theme around what their student center would look like. So if they accepted that, you know, there's possible students on their campus may be experiencing some of these challenges with learning. At Laurier, we have the Accessibility Center, which provides accommodation to students, again, around the equity lens, so that students can receive the supports they need in order to be able to learn effectively. So there wasn't anything like that at either of these universities. So on the second day, we were doing innovation activities around what an accessibility center would look like, what alternative forms of assessment could look like. So we used one of my favorite techniques, which is creating personas. So I had each of the faculty members work together in small groups, and they both drew a big picture and then also described a student that was in their mind. So a persona isn't necessarily a particular person, but it's a description that represents a distinct group of people that you can think about. And from a social innovation, is we often sort of approach it from a human or user-focused lens. So it's really about meeting the needs of people, of humans. And so when you go we start with a persona, then when you're crafting a solution, you can always look back at this real potential person and check whether your solution is actually going to work for the person, this persona that you have. So it worked out really well in that, the teams had, I think, 8 or 10 different personas. And so as we were designing the accessibility centers, every time they said, well, we should add this feature, we were able to look at the 8 sort of students that they had designed, that they had developed, to say, well, would this meet the needs of this student? Would this meet all of the needs of this student? And then once they had proposed a solution, we only had a limited amount of time, so once they had got to a place of a solution, we were able to check with our personas again, is the design, is this accessibility center going to meet all the needs of the students that are on your campus that are described by these sort of 8 characters that you have here? So it's a great technique just to continue to focus you back on solutions for real people rather than cool ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. But I don't know if it does actually. So, what do you mean instead of just cool ideas?
So you can have my first area of research was around literacy, so helping young kids learn how to read, right? So a cool idea might be something that I come up with, or it might be something based on research, and it's more theoretical. So this idea should work because of this, and I think it's cool because we're going to use tablets. Like that's a cool idea. But if it doesn't actually work for the people, if it doesn't actually help the kids that you're trying to help, then it's not actually a good idea. It's just a cool idea.
I see. Yeah. That makes more sense. I'm just assuming, but are some of the things different, just in terms of like education or curriculum or resources between somewhere like Canada and Afghanistan? I guess would it be like knowledge and research on things like having an accessibility center, or is it more so? I guess I'm wondering, like, what are the differences?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can speak to the differences in the Middle East because that's sort of my only experience there. But I've lived in British Virgin Islands for 3 years full time, and then the last. Before the pandemic, because we don't travel anymore apparently. Before that, I was sort of shifted to a half-time. So I have the experience of living there, but also I'm involved in a research project with other faculty members from Laurier where we're working in St. Lucia and in Haiti. And the cultural context is very different, both between the Caribbean education system and Canada, but also within those 3 Caribbean countries. It's very different as well. There's just some context kinds of things, like it's not cold there, and so schools can be more open air, and lunches happen outside, and a lot more instruction happens outside. That when it's really hot, in Canada in the summer, our students spend more time outside. In the Caribbean, in the summer, they spend more time inside because it's really hot and they have the air conditioning on in their schools. So even just some of those small things. But I don't think that, even in Waterloo locally, I don't think that we value enough the expertise in our communities by having the University of Waterloo and Wilfrid Laurier here. Like, it's not a big thing to find an expert in anything that you want, right? Like what kind of amazing guest speakers can you get in your grade 12 physics class by having the Perimeter Institute? So I think there's probably, there's so many different things, but access to resources, physical and intellectual resources. everything has to be bought and shipped in from a technology, from a books, classroom books, everything like that has to be purchased and it can be more expensive and it takes a lot of time. So, I mean, there's so many things, and that's not even any of the cultural pieces. Like, we're just talking purely about, yeah.
What kind of economy does the British Virgin Islands have? Like, where do they really getting their money from?
Tourism is a huge part, which is why they're struggling now
Right.
in the pandemic, but they're also a financial center. So a lot of the big banks would have locations there, depending on who you ask. They may be considered a tax haven, but the BVI would argue against that, obviously. But yeah, they have that, I guess, reputation in some sectors. But tourism is huge throughout the Caribbean. I think, yeah.
Are there a lot of retired people there? Just
not particularly. So the British Virgin Islands is a real sailing mecca.
Oh.
So for sailors, it's a sort of feather in your hat to say that you've sailed there. The Sir Francis Drake Channel, and you've been to Bitter End Yacht Club, and like there's sort of those are check marks for a lot of sailors. So there's a huge sailing industry there. Peak season, so it's been a rough kind of go for them. At fall of 2017, there was a very large hurricane. I mean, the scale only goes to 5, but if you push the winds out in a sort of linear fashion, it was like a Category 7 hurricane that went through. The island was heavily damaged, but peak season, I think they've got like 1,000 sailboats on rental a week all through the winter months. Like, you think about 8 people on 1,000 boats every week, flying in, buying groceries and going to restaurants, and that's a huge part of their economy.
I don't know if they're tourist economy. I think like there's just kind of a common theme between a lot of countries that happen to be like that rely on tourism, that there's sort of that weird inability to access those resources.
Yeah, it's hard having an industrial focused business there because there is no store that sells the parts that I need for the plastics recycling business that we do. So if we break something, it takes us at least 3, probably closer to 6 weeks to get the part that we need. So we could be shut down.
Wow.
So problem solving, we've come up with all kinds of creative ways about, taking apart fans to access motors, and like ceiling fans to take out motors, and we've used plumbing parts to sort of cobble together different things that we need. So yeah.
How much like recycling and garbage have you guys found? Is there a number?
Oh yeah, it's I think we're. Oh gosh, I should have come more prepared.
That's okay.
With that answer. It's in the tons.
Should have told you I was wondering.
It's in the tons of plastic that's been processed.
And is that like, that's a lot actually, because plastic is usually pretty light.
Yeah.
Especially if you just have a bunch of bottle caps to have tons of that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of plastic.
So, yes, so I'm proud of my role in collaboration with lots of other people. So as I said, when we first went there as tourists in 2012, there was no recycling. You put all your stuff in the bin, and it went in the garbage. And now, and again, I have one role in collaboration with other very smart, capable people. There's now a fully functioning recycling system, and we're, not even, I think really sort of 2016 is when I would say sort of started. So in 5 years, in BVI, there are now bins on all of the major islands where you can go and deposit your plastic, your glass, and your aluminum, and it will be taken care of properly. So moving more towards a waste management system and actually a material management system. So I'm proud of that contribution that there's, and I say that sort of with a slight hesitancy because the last year has been hard, and not being able to be there meant that I haven't been the full partner that I want to be, that the people that work in our facility are taking on maybe responsibilities that are slightly above what they feel comfortable doing because I'm not able to be there. I feel a certain amount of guilt, I suppose, but I try and give myself a little bit of grace that I'm doing the best that I can. It is a global pandemic.
Definitely.
I've made some difficult choices, and we're gonna come back strong. As soon as there's an opportunity, I'll be back there, and we'll get things rolling again.
Well, I mean, you definitely should be proud of that, because I think like what's crazy is it's just to touch on what you were saying earlier, when you kind of just throw something on the side of a ditch, or just throw out a cigarette butt and you kind of forget about it, and it's kind of easy to just forget. But later, or at least for me, when I'm walking down the street, walking the neighborhood, and I see garbage, it actually just looks sad. It's like, what is this doing here? You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to say I've never littered before, but not within the last like year or two, I've realized that if we're gonna take care of anything, why would it not be the thing that gives us life? You know what I mean?
Well, it's a bit disrespectful, I think, to we live in a shared environment in this neighborhood. To put a pop can is like on the ground is like disrespectful to your neighbors and the other people you share this physical space with. I think I sort of come to that place. Like if you don't clean up, so I'm a beach person. So if you don't clean up your trash at the beach, your expectation is that it will either wash into the ocean, or that someone else will come and clean it up for you. And I think both of those choices are disrespectful. It's interesting, so we actually talked to some kids in Tortola and asked them about, we had seen the pop can on the ground. And the two responses that we got was, someone will pick it up. It's okay, someone will pick it up. Or, and one that I found sort of funny but also sad at the same time was the one guy said, well, that's Coca-Cola's can. That's their problem, it's not my problem.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that sort of, I don't know, just felt no responsibility for it at all, that was not his can.
That's kind of mind-blowing to me, because I've never thought like Coca-Cola should pick it up. It's like, man, you bought it, you had it, you drank it. You know, sure, they might have done a bunch of things, that's damaging to the environment to make that can. But at the end of the day, I think, I don't know, it's how can you not take responsibility, especially if you just threw it? I just think that it is kind of funny.
If we circle back to sort of the innovation topic we were on before, that just asking someone, so, we're struggling with all the litter that's on the ground. Well, why are people putting garbage on the ground? And what most people will do is, you can look for research, you can make assumptions, which are probably biased because of your own things going on. The easiest and best thing to do is just ask people. Ask people, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And then you have, you might not like the answer, but now we have a lot more information about how to design a solution that's actually going to work. So
I think that might be kind of actually funny, going up to someone and, like, if you see them littering, just ask them why they did that. Because I think some people might get embarrassed and maybe not do it again.
Possible.
But wait, what do you mean you should be careful with it? Like,
we have a funny society right now. You don't want someone could be very angry with you
for asking them. You have a good point. It's weird that you say that, because I think you're right. Like, I think we live in a weird thing where you could easily just turn the tables around. And just be seen as bad.
I don't want to go down a dark corner because this could take us. But there's I find the violence really in the world right now really troubling. Like the people who get shot for cutting you off on the highway, all of that stuff is really scary to me.
Definitely.
That's where we are right now.
I had seen that. I've never like lived in the States or been to. I've been to a hockey game in Detroit once, but like that doesn't really count. But my friend had sent me
It's
this.
like not leaving the airport. It doesn't count.
Yeah, it doesn't. My friend had sent me this article where there was just this dispute between two neighbors, some guy that lived across the street, and there was a video camera on the one house's garage, and you can see the entire driveway, you can see the road, and you can see a little bit of the driveway of the house across. And all you hear is in the beginning is just kind of like yelling between these two neighbors about snow removal. So I don't know to what extent, but it's just about people not shoveling, I guess. And you just hear this guy say like, okay, do it, go get it. And the other guy runs into the house, comes back with a gun, and this husband and wife are on the road, and they're still kind of like going back and forth. And I guess they just didn't think he was gonna do anything, but he shoots them both. This lady drops on the ground, and this guy's shot. And the worst part is you can hear the audio, so you can hear this guy screaming, and he runs into the garage, and then the neighbor goes back into the house, comes out with a military gun, like a whole big thing, and just shoots this woman on the street, and then goes in and kills this guy in the house, goes back into his own house and commits suicide.
Oh my gosh.
And it's crazy because of things like that and stuff on the news, I don't even want to go to the US.
But so I try and take a more empathetic approach. This is me up on the balcony, right?
Okay.
That, like, what takes someone to that place? You know, how bad does it need to be in that person's reality, and like using their perspective,
Right.
that snow removal is the thing that, you know, puts you over the edge, right? Like, I think about that all the time when people do really crazy, out of character. Like, how did you get to that place?
Yeah, because actually I would like to know what brought him there, and then see how I feel about it. Because it's like, okay, if I for whatever reason have the emotion to do the same thing, then it's like, okay, maybe he has a point.
Yeah.
But if it's just because, I don't know,
How bad does your day or your week or your month have to be coming up to that moment to do those actions? I don't know.
and I just think being able to have those types of gun on you at any time.
He didn't cry, maybe he didn't cry.
Honestly, I think you have a good point. Someone didn't hug him. The other thing I was really curious about as well is when you had mentioned just, you know, working with government and policy in management, whether here or, you know, or in the BVI. How do you find? Actually, sorry, I shouldn't say how do you find, but what do you find to be just the absolute most universal management rule to be, you know, that you took to BVI, and regardless of a culture or society, what is still kind of similar that you can always kind of use?
One of the most important lessons for me was, you know, it's sort of taking a more empathetic approach. So instead of these people working under you, for you, you know, whatever kind of, if you think of a traditional hierarchical structure, that sort of that language tends to dominate. But a really good manager, good leader, I think, is in service to the people that are on their team. So I have a long way to go in my development of doing that, but to be able to have a good relationship with all the people on your team, and to know them, to know what their goals are, where do they, you know, what kinds of tasks do they feel most comfortable, most confident, where would they like support, you know, how can you contribute to helping them reach their goals, and either personally or professionally. So I think when you, as a manager, if you take on more of an approach that you are in service to the people on your team, it almost creates a bit of loyalty, I guess, that, you know, if you're doing everything you can to help them and support them, then they want to do good work for you. So I think you create that bond. The other super important thing for a manager is to not try and give the illusion that you actually know all of the answers. We talk about that, you know, sense of vulnerability again, or that sense of openness. To invite your team members to be part of developing solutions, or, you know, to be able to say, I don't know. Create space for them to be able to say, I don't know how to do that, rather than them, like, if you're faking it and saying that you have this all figured out, and then they get assigned work that they don't understand, that means they're going to be faking it too, because they don't feel, and I think it's called a psychological safety, but they don't feel the sense that they're allowed to be vulnerable to you. So that, I guess those are my two big twin lessons that I've taken away. I loved working in government. It was a fantastic experience. I would recommend it to anyone. There are tons of frustrating things, obviously. Like, it's not like any big corporation. It's not perfect. But I learned so much. I became a much better professional. Being a better writer, being a better speaker, being a better decision maker, being a better leader, all of that was through my experience in government. The opportunity to influence at scale is amazing. Like, to design a policy that rolls out across Ontario, to contribute to a decision that's implemented across Ontario, especially when you feel, people might not agree, but when you feel like you've done your research, you've considered all the options, you've made the best choice with the resources available, there's a certain amount of pride, I guess, in that, and being able to contribute, and that's the word that's important to me, that being able to contribute in your community, in the place where you live, in the place that, you know, that you call home. So those are all really wonderful things about government. It's hard to get in. It's hard to get your first job.
I believe it.
Yeah. I got very lucky.
Yeah?
I was, an opening in my field came up right towards the end of my PhD, in a department that I had previously had work through some research that I had been doing at the university. So I knew someone. So when I applied, my name wasn't brand new. They'd seen me before, had seen my work before. So yeah, I got very lucky. Do
you think you're lucky?
It's difficult. It would not be humble to say, no, I've done all of this all on my own. That's not my answer. But I think that you have to prepare to be lucky. There's more of a sentence in there that I missed, but you have to be open to an opportunity to accept the luck that comes through that door, if that makes sense.
100%.
Yeah. You can, so I know someone who was offered an amazing job. It was the work that he wanted to do, and it was the money was going to be great. It was a real opportunity to jumpstart a career. But mentally, he wasn't open to that idea. It was going to require moving from here, to another part in Canada. So that was it. He was offered a lucky job break. He was offered for that, and wasn't ready to take that opportunity.
I think opportunity and luck, they're there, and I think it's just about kind of seeing it. I think it's just kind of about, I know what you mean, you're just ready, so that when you are lucky, you can take that luck and you can take that opportunity.
And I would say it also has to do with what we were talking about before about sort of how you interpret failure. So, if you buy 100 lottery tickets and 2 of them you win, like, you got lucky
100%.
on those 2 lottery tickets, but you also didn't stop buying lottery tickets when the first 98 didn't win, right?
Yeah.
So, lotteries are not a great idea, but if you talk about in research, you write grant proposals all the time as an academic. You write grant proposals. If you don't get the first 10, it's easy to be frustrated and despondent about that. But instead, if you, after every one, you say, well, how could I make this better? If you seek out the feedback from the reviewers, if you improve your resume, if you bring on a collaborator who adds a new set of skills to your team, like, if after every loss you try and get better, and then you submit again and you win, you win the funding, you got lucky, but you did some work in order to put yourself in that place to be lucky.
Yeah. I think it also has to do with being vulnerable as well, because saying that, you have this opportunity to move to another part of Canada, but not taking it maybe has something to do with being a little too scared of being vulnerable, of moving to another place. Because it's funny, because I was actually talking to my cousin today about, like, getting a different place and moving out and stuff, and the conversation came up to try a different province, because realistically, for people my age in southern Ontario, getting a house is going to be very difficult, and if and when you do, I feel like you're just going to be paying a mortgage till you die. So just, not even that, even just rent, like, you can find something for half or a third of the price somewhere else. But when that kind of came up, although it was like, that'd be really cool, I'd love to go there, at the same time, to your point earlier, if it doesn't scare you, it's not big enough. And I was like, I've lived here my entire life. So although, like, me even just considering to move to another province is terrifying in itself, but I genuinely believe that it's something that might need to be done. And at that point, it's like, is it really fear? You know what I mean? Because I think, I don't know, I think there's this weird thing with, like, anxiety where you kind of assume that you're just scared, right? Like, you're just anxious, like, you're just worried that something's going to happen. But it's like, nah, it's anxiety in the sense where, like, you might have butterflies and you're excited, kind of like you're in a roller coaster, you're just strapped in. That's the way I see it. And it's funny, when you say words like failure and vulnerability and, like, losing, I think they all have these specific connotations towards them that we just assume that that's the outcome, or we assume that's the feeling, when in reality, I think if you kind of, and that's another crazy thing about words, is because they're just so ambiguous, you can put your own meaning to it. So for me, when you say that you've lost, like, I have, like, it's weird. I don't know how to describe it.
I'm using those words intentionally.
Right, of course.
Conversation. Yeah. In the innovation world, a lot of people at the end of a project write a failure report.
Really?
So these are the things that didn't work. And there's no harm in that. It's about documenting lessons so that you don't repeat that exact same mistake again. Like, that's a good part of a project wrap up. So too often we celebrate all of the things that went well without capturing the things that were stupid that we don't want to do again. So yeah, it's hard to, it's unless you're willing to acknowledge all of those things, you're not really learning the most that you can out of that experience.
I guess it makes sense, because it's just about, like, a balance. Like, if you can be happy, then why can't you be sad? But it's like, if you can win and celebrate that, like, to your point, why wouldn't you be able to sit down and see your failures? Like, if you can sit here and talk about how well you did, how can you not acknowledge how shitty you did too at the same time?
Yeah, you can say, I'm good at this, and these are the areas where I need to continue to improve.
Have you found a lot of that with creating recycling infrastructure? Like, have you been able to say, like, well, I've made a lot of mistakes, but...
Oh, I've made a ton of mistakes.
Yeah?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But I grant myself a little bit of grace. I hold myself to a high standard, but I allow a bit of grace in that I'm trying to do something that's really hard that, other people... no one is hugely successful. Well, very few people are hugely successful in, working in a place like I'm working, doing the thing that I'm trying to do. But also, I didn't know anything about it. I had never recycled plastic before. I had never run a business before. So I'm learning as fast as I can, and I can be proud of that part as well.
Right.
Proud of the perseverance and the yeah.
Really, I guess off topic again, but the other thing that I was wondering from before, so you were talking about just accessibility centers and working with like learning disabilities. What I've realized recently is I definitely can't focus for a long period of time, and I'm sure you could tell, but but I was wondering, like, why is it that, I guess I shouldn't say why is it that, because I personally haven't been in a setting where like I'm being accommodated by a teacher or someone else for a learning disability, but just from what I've seen, why is it that we can't necessarily adhere to the lack of being able to focus? And I'm assuming it has to do with like technology and having a phone when you're like a little kid and you can just bounce around on apps. But why can't we necessarily like teach someone 4 or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, however long they can focus, and then just switch a subject? You know what I mean? Like, would that work logistically? Because I've been realizing like the best way I work is if I have a task, and when I get bored, I just move on to a different task. And it's like, I'm still productive, but I'm just doing something else.
That means that your task probably isn't hard enough. Like
Interesting.
it's like the golden rule. I'm gonna train there's the sweet spot for learning is when the task that you're trying to accomplish is slightly harder than your current abilities. So I think it's like they've measured it. It's like 4% harder than your current abilities, and that means that you're able to work on it. Like you know enough that you're able to work on it and get some successes, but it isn't so easy that everything is habitual and obvious. Like you actually have to work at it. So if that's both challenging and also rewarding, because you're doing something that's hard, but you're finding success in doing the thing that's hard. So this is in Atomic Habits, the book that I recommend to you. Yeah, the sweet spot is where you're trying to do something that's just a little bit harder than what you currently can do. So if you're doing something and you're bored, it's maybe not hard enough for you.
But is there a difference between being bored and not being able to focus?
Yes.
Because there must be. Because I don't feel bored. I'm just like, I just want to do something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's so it's hard. Like there are when you're going to school, there are subjects that you're supposed to learn, and not all of those are going to be interesting to you. And so some of that is just about perseverance and doing the task that you're supposed to do to get the grade to. The magical thing for me about the longer that I went to school is the more choice you get over what you're studying. And in my work career, I've been very fortunate to largely, even when I was in the ministry, there were some tasks that were assigned to me that I didn't love, but the vast majority of my projects were things that I had a hand in shaping and designing the work. So I think the more you start focusing it, and the more that you're lucky enough, maybe say it that way, to do work that is actually in your area of interest, the less it is about being bored and being required to focus.
Right.
Like you have your own. Everyone has their own thing that they celebrate. Like if you get paid to do the thing that you like to do, then it's really easy. Like I can be a total data nerd. I'm working with this huge longitudinal data set right now. And once it's hard for me to start because it's complicated and I've got all these papers going everywhere. Anyways, but once I start, it's hours. Like I'm fascinated by the analysis and the questions that are prompted, and that leads me down a path. Like for some people, that is the worst thing in the world, and they don't want to go anywhere near that many numbers. But for me, that's really interesting work, and so it isn't about being bored, if that makes sense,
right?
Because I'm doing something that I'm choosing to do. So I wish you the best in that. Once you're not bored now, I hope you're doing something that's interesting, and so you're having no problem focusing. So yeah, I think it's more about whether it's work you want to be doing or not. But there's something that's assigned to you don't actually care about, then it might be hard to focus. But when you're doing your thing, you're good. So you shouldn't have any concerns.
I guess that makes sense because I've never really been a huge fan of school. So yeah, that kind of adds up.
Mm-hmm.
But you've been in school for a while then.
I went to university for a long time. It was great.
It was great? Why was it great?
I don't know. Well, again, so I have to recognize it's a huge amount of privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah.
My parents did not pay my whole way, for the record. There was a commitment that they would help me go to university, but they clarified that meant only a first 4-year degree. So I worked, but I love the learning. Like that's what I said. I take courses online. I do Audible books. I do all this because there's so much of the world. The longer I went to school, the more I appreciated how little of the world I actually understood. Because as you go and you study, you narrow and narrow and narrow down, right? And so my specialization was in early literacy, so how children 4 years to 8 years old learn how to read and how we can, and then my innovation pieces, we tested all kinds of methods about how to better support the learning of children who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, because those children might struggle early to read, and we know that early literacy is hugely predictive of later academic success. So that, again, a very, very narrow specialization. So as you learn more and more, you focus on this and this, I started to appreciate how much I must not understand about everything else in the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really spurred this sort of continual love of learning, I guess.
Interesting.
But I was when I was doing my degree, I had 3 jobs. So I went to school, but and then I also was a server at the university bar, and I taught a seminar, first year seminar. So as a senior student, you could teach a first year seminar. And then on the weekends, I worked at the Bay fixing watches.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny. I had to get my battery replaced.
Yep, I changed a lot of batteries. But the part-time, I don't know, working those part-time jobs just felt like it was fine.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't.
You were content?
I had a big goal.
Ah, I see.
So those were the things that had to get done to be on the path. So.
That's cool you say that, because the thing that I've sort of been not necessarily like struggling with, but I guess another habit that I've been trying to break has been like understanding that these part-time jobs that I am working are just on the path. I shouldn't necessarily been thinking like, oh, this isn't my path, or like I need to hurry up and get down the path faster. Like understanding patience and understanding that you're on the path and you're gonna get there, but you're just gonna have to wait a little bit. It's just a long way. You know what I mean? And like working, although I don't have 3 jobs, I think working 2 is just so like frustrating, and it sucks because like coming into something that's just part-time, you don't want to do forever or do for a long time. It's just, I don't want to be here. You know, I want to go working on my other things that I can have so much more fun and actually focus on, you know? So I don't know. I think it's just about me remembering that I'm only 21, and that I still have to, you know, be patient.
Absolutely.
But the other thing I was wondering about school though is like, how do you, I don't know how to word this, like personally, I don't necessarily think that like school is everything, you know, and I think a lot of people do. How do you?
No, I don't think that school is everything.
Did you ever at one point?
No, I was actually, so in all fairness, I was a terrible student. In that, so I was going to university. I was going to school and then university before there's the shift that there is now to experiential learning and a lot more like the flipped classroom where you're doing a lot of discussion stuff. Right. There was just a lot of reviewing stuff that was in the textbook. So yeah, I had very poor attendance, let's just say. I wasn't a great student because I live very strongly. I feel really that the word "and" is really important, that you can do this and that and that and that. So while I went to school, and that was really important, and I had a big goal, and education and going to school was in service to my big goal. I also didn't want to miss out on any of that other stuff. So I played sports teams, I took music lessons, I worked jobs, like I had an active social life, like traveled. There's I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
But also, and can I add more to my answer?
Please.
That education isn't just about school. Like, I think that that's important, and there's now so much more respect for non-traditional, non-formal schooling that you can go to travel and take a job somewhere else and learn doing work. Like, that's also all education and not school.
Yeah.
So.
And I think even the word education is just, I think we use it so synonymously with school, but I think it has nothing to do with school. Like, I think just learning and education can literally be found anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know, and people ask what life is about, but maybe it's about learning.
I think so.
Do you? What's life about? What do you think?
Oh, goodness. I'm not prepared for that.
Neither am I, but it just kind of came up. But I don't know. I think life is crazy. But yeah. That being said, though, I'm just going to press stop on this thing.
Okay.
So thank you for chatting with me.
We had a winding conversation.
Yeah, right? It's funny. I think all my conversations are very winding. Because it's like you can talk to me about British Virgin Islands, but as soon as you mentioned recycling, that was a whole different ballgame. Actually, the other thing that I was wondering too, though, was taking like environmental classes here at Laurier. One of the things that I've learned is that the municipalities in Ontario, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of them can't actually handle as much recycling as we think, although we separate and stuff. Mm-hmm. Not all of it actually goes to recycling because of the municipal infrastructure. Is that true?
I think it's less about the municipal infrastructure and more about the city or municipal contractor who does the collection. They take the material to a place called the Material Recovery Facility, MRF, and they might have specific rules or protocols around what gets accepted as recyclable materials. So they use a combination of physical and optical sorters to automate, then some human sorters, to automate how the material all gets separated, because some people only buy clear number 2 plastics and some people only buy number 5 type plastics, right? Like, so just speaking specifically about plastics. A lot of those facilities are the ones that put up the barriers. So where I live, they only take white foams, like they will not take a colored foam. They won't take a lot of sort of 50-50 about which municipalities will take plastic bags and which ones don't. And that has to do with the private material recovery facility that's doing the sorting. But my understanding is in Ontario, they've passed legislation that's going to have minimum standards that all of the municipalities will have to follow, so that there'll be more consistency across the province.
Do you think that's something that should have been done a while ago?
Probably. There's a lack of innovation.
Okay.
Because all of the companies I won't say all. Many of the companies in the recycling sector are just doing things the way that they've always been done. But if you read the literature, there's talk. They talk about a circular economy, that all of the material that goes into a waste stream should be processed and recovered and then used to make things again. That circular nature, so that we stop mining our finite resources and make better use of the waste that's available. That's still largely theoretical. There are not a lot of companies that are doing research in material science about how we can make better use of some of these materials that are coming through the waste stream. manufacturers are hesitant to change their processes from the virgin materials, like the pure natural raw materials that they're using, to better incorporate some of the recyclable content. So it's all possible, but companies need to do a better job. And so economics would say that government needs, because private companies right now are making money doing the way that they currently are, and there are no consequences to continuing to do it the way that they are. And so economics would suggest that in order to make that change, consumers need to change their buying behavior so that there are consequences for those private sector companies, and they will respond. Or government needs to create incentives to make the change in the new behaviors that they want to see. So if that happens, we'll decide. I think actually that consumer behaviors are changing, that people are making more intentional choices around that are related to sustainability, and we're starting to see some manufacturers therefore changing how they're doing their work to respond to consumer demand. So
see, I totally think that you're right, but at the same time I might argue that like a lot of it, because it's up to packaging and marketing and sort of like just, I guess, consumer psychology, you might even just be able to argue that a lot of it kind of is just marketing. Like how many of it really is, how many of these companies really being sustainable? Like you can turn to car manufacturers and say that, yeah, they're all green and stuff, but it's easy because none of the advertisement really reminds us that batteries take a lot to make. Getting rid of them is just like really difficult.
Smaller stuff like that. If you go to the grocery store, like when you can buy a green pepper, but there are some stores that insist on putting 2 green peppers on a styrofoam pan and then wrapping them in plastic.
Right.
Which seems
good point.
ridiculous.
Yeah, very ridiculous. Or, all right, goodness me, I've seen oranges peeled in a plastic container.
Yeah.
I think it was goodness me, but either way, like it has a cover for a reason.
How lazy are we people? We can't peel our own orange, and then by doing that, we have to put it in a plastic package.
What's crazy about Waterloo, the University of Waterloo, because it's apparently known very well internationally, it's just funny. Like to me, I've always grown up here, and to me, it's just a bunch of buildings, and it's just a university. But to other people, they're coming from other sides of the world talking about UW, this and that. But to me, I just take it for granted because I live down the street. So it's just kind of funny to me, and I think it comes back to like that perspective of me always seeing it, but kind of taking it for granted. I guess I don't know.
Waterloo feels like home after living in lots of countries, but it's not just universities. I love that there are museums and research institutes, and you can go to a physics lecture and you can get a demonstration of hydrology and all of this random stuff on Clay and Glass Museum. There's all these really amazing things that you can do here. So yeah, I feel a sense of community in Waterloo, in the architecture and the organization and design of the streetscapes, and all of that very much feels like the most comfortable place to me versus other places I lived. This feels like home.
Well, good. I'm happy to hear that.
But I'm not from here. It's just I've lived here for a really long time.
Where are you from?
London.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess when you live here long enough.
But it's different. London feels different than Waterloo.
Interesting.
Yeah. Not good or bad. I'm sure people don't want to offend anyone in London. But this has become my home.
Well, I'm happy to hear that because it's my home as well. So I love hearing that.